Good evening, everyone. Charles Moscowitz, thank you for joining me as I am in the early stages of launching my nightly program. I shall be on Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to 11 and eventually midnight, starting January 1st, starting the first of the year officially. Right now, I'm just experimenting a bit. My goal here is to create a live experience every weekday night with interaction. I'm going to be getting some technical advice on how to set up the chat properly, just to show how inept I am in many ways. But more significantly for me, I am establishing, and I have established, a real phone line where my viewers who are listening live will be able to call in and join me in conversation. In fact, if you're listening right now, while I do this experiment, it's now 8:41 ET PM. You can call in at 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. I'm in the process of setting up some interviews starting next week. I'm kind of, getting my feet wet a little bit with this. I'm not going to be going every night, at least not until January. But once I hit the road after the first of the year, I'm going to be really committed to doing this every night with guests, with phone calls, and with the proper promotion. It's interesting how many amazing. I actually been doing some survey on this. How many stations are carrying the program and are doing so live? Let me just go over it. I mean, it's actually pretty amazing what you can do. Besides YouTube, the live program is carried simultaneously on my Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitch, DLive, YouNow, VK, Trovo, Picardo, and Podomatic accounts. In fact, that reminds me, thank you for mentioning. Let me just set up the Podomatic while we're at it here. Yeah, I'm kind of doing this as a one-armed horseman. Let's see, here we go, Podomatic. All you have to do is click record a new episode and off you go. Let's skip the test and go. 3, 2, 1, and we're live. And we're live now on Podomatic as well. Thank you for joining me. This includes all of my podcast programs in case you're just tuning in. Charles Moscowitz, the program is going to be live Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight, starting the first of the year. Right now, I'm doing some experimenting. I'm just sort of getting my feet wet, and we'll be doing it intermittently between now and the end of this month. I've already got some guests lined up for next week, but suffice to say that the program will be live. It'll be interactive. I will be accepting phone calls. And in fact, if you're listening live right now at 8:44 p.m., you can call in the program at 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. I thought I would take a little time to just discuss some of the logistics of how this is going to work. The program live streams on, I believe it's 10 live streams simultaneously. It's pretty amazing. And those are as follows. You can find any of them by putting my name in the server along with the name of the live stream. I'm going to be, in fact, contacting them and looking into ways to reach each of their audiences. And I'm going to be publishing a full website flyer, if you will, with all the necessary links. So that's coming up. That's on its way. But I think for now, I just want to mention what they are. They are as follows for the live stream: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitch, DLive, YouNow, VK, Trovo, Picardo, and Podomatic. So those are all live streams. I may be adding Sprecher to that as a live stream as well. We'll see. But all of those presently are simultaneously getting the live stream for the program. So my theory, and by the way, it costs me very little, and it's pretty amazing. So, I mean, maybe we should talk about some of the technology here, but my sense is that between all of these live streams, and each of these live streams is done by probably, I would guess, a fairly sizable company, that if I develop a relationship with each of these companies, I can do outreach to all of the various people that subscribe to these streams, and try to build a program from there as I build an audience. Now, these are the sites that carry the archive of the program. And in fact, I can't confirm this, but I believe some of them are presently carrying the live stream through Podomatic, but you can listen to them at any time of the day. I have full archives of hundreds of programs on all of these sites. I've been doing this now for a number of years, and they are all excellent companies. I'm going to be reaching out to all of them as well. And they are as follows: iTunes, which of course is the Apple podcast. That's the flagship. Then you have iHeartRadio, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Listen Notes, Podchaser, Podimo, Owltail, MyTuner, Podtail, Pod Paradise, SoundCloud, Vimeo, Rumble, Minds, and Reddit. Oh, and I forgot to mention Spotify, BitChute, Amazon Music, Odyssey, Ghana, and Weebly. That's a lot of sites. And I think there's even a few more that I'm going to dig out before I'm done. Oh, and I let me just also mention, I've got blog sites at Blogger and Medium, and I've got sites at Gab and Parler. And I think I might be forgetting one or two, but I'll get to that. The point I'm making here is that I think that I have enough of a platform that I am in a position right now where I will be able to launch a solid live program with calls once it's properly presented, properly promoted. Once I get all the kind of the graphics down, I will be able to reach my goal, which is to do just that. Have a live program with calls where we can really stretch out and discuss issues. And my theory is here, by doing it at late night as opposed to in the middle of the day, there's less noise, there's less clutter, there's less competition, quite frankly. And I very well could be in a position where I can dodge some of the censorship that's going on right now, particularly on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, and maybe delve into areas that the big players might look the other way because it's late night, because I don't have millions or even thousands, tens of thousands of followers. I don't even know if I care about that so much. I'm more interested in getting the live experience with dedicated followers, people who really want to talk and want to be heard, where I can develop an online community. I think that I should mention that I'm also hoping to get sponsors. And I think I'm in a better position at that time of the night to get sponsors, and also to get possibly the program carried by radio stations, because radio stations, especially at that time of night, they are seeking content. You know, they need to do something because they have to fill their hour 24 hours a day. And if I can offer them good live content, that all they need to do is hook into a stream, one of my streams, and the sound quality is good enough, and I believe that it is. Maybe there might be some tweaking, but I think it is. Then I might be able to attract a couple, or maybe more than a couple, of good old-fashioned radio stations, which of course would be amazing. I should mention that the program, until I get sponsored, is self-sponsored by my books. I'm the author of almost 20 books. My latest book is now available. I just published it literally weeks ago, and it is called Sociology for Conservatives. You can check that out at Amazon Books or at Barnes and Noble Books. Sociology for Conservatives, an American Conservative Social Theory. That is my most recent book. It's based on my experiences as I'm literally going through now of, at my old age, getting a degree in sociology at the local community college here in Boston, the Bunker Hill Community College, where I'm going to classes, thank God. I mean, I'm glad now with COVID lessening, they actually are allowing people to go to classes, even though you have to wear the mask. But either way, at least I'm getting out there and I'm getting back into the class, which I'm enjoying, and which is interesting to me to kind of go back into a college at my age and see what's going on in our culture, what's going on in terms of what young people are thinking about, what their attitudes are. I mean, there was a couple of people my age in the class as well. You know, community colleges are not just for, you know, newly minted high school kids going to college. I mean, it has a pretty good cross section of people of different ages, different ethnic backgrounds, different religions. Everyone's there, and it's amazing, and I'm really enjoying it. I should also mention, just as a matter of programming, that my last book, I can hold this one up because I have a copy, is The Satanic Conspiracy, The Spectre Haunting Mankind. That also is available at Amazon Books and Barnes and Noble Books. So right now, as I mentioned, I'm just doing a little experiment, getting into radio again. It's a fantastic feeling. I love radio, and I am really looking forward to interacting with listeners and callers and guests. Let me, before I get into just a couple of issues, I'm not going to stay on long right now, unless somebody wants to call in, in which case I will stay on and we can really delve into some issues. The number, if you're listening live, is 617-396-4958. That's 617-396-4958. Since the unfortunate events of January 6th, the government has used that as a way to prosecute average Americans, and now that is going to even include anyone who might question the validity of the election. Now, let me just briefly go into a little background here. January 6th of 2001 was the last opportunity that the American people had to try to find out if there was voter fraud during that election, to the extent that there may have been states that were tampered with to a degree that they ought to be looked at, and that their delegations should not be certified, that they should have to re-examine their elections and maybe either not certify their delegation or certify the alternative delegation. Now, what happened on that date, what happens every 4 years on that date, is that there is a convening of Congress, both houses come together, headed up by a one-day president of the convention. It's not a convention, but of the session, of the ratifying session. And that president is the vice president of the United States. And what happens is that each state sends a delegation, and the delegation then confirms who was elected in each of the states, and whoever gets the requisite number of delegates becomes the president of the United States. Now, just for the record, in case anyone is checking this program out from YouTube, I acknowledge that Joe Biden received the necessary delegates, as did Kamala Harris, and thus they were elected president and vice president of the United States, and they were inaugurated on January 20th. Thus, they are the president. I don't question that. That's not anything that it's obvious that that happened. I mean, that's as clear as apples and oranges. That's how our system works. I respect the system. I am an institutionalist. I believe in the institution. However, that does not therefore mean that that particular date is not the appropriate time for states by which there may be an alternative delegation has been elected by, or appointed maybe, I don't know how it works, it probably depends on the state, by the alternative candidate to contest the delegation. And that's what was supposed to happen on January 6th. There was nothing unconstitutional about that. This has happened in elections going all the way back to the election of 1800, when Thomas Jefferson, who was vice president at the time and who was acting in the capacity as such as the president of the session, actually declared himself president of the United States. There was some major issues and contests brought up by various states. This also happened more recently. It happened in 2004 when the state of Ohio contested the George W. Bush delegation. And there was hearings, and it was ruled that Bush had won Ohio, but that the process was there. This has happened. I believe it also happened in the election of 1960. It certainly happened in the election of 1876, when you had the Hayes-Tilden race, and it happened in 1824 with the Adams-Jackson race, where you had contestation on that day. And eventually, in the case of Adams-Jackson, and I think in the case of Tilden-Hayes, the election went to the House of Representatives, and they decided who was to be the next president. So there is nothing whatsoever unconstitutional about a state contesting, or an alternative delegation from a state contesting a sitting delegation. And this was exactly what was supposed to happen in 7 states where you had an alternative delegation supporting President Trump that had been elected by or appointed by Republicans in that state, who contended that the state had a sufficient number of election improprieties that there was a question as to who actually won in those states. Now, those 7 states were Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. And there was one more. I think there was a 7th state, which was New Mexico. Even though in New Mexico, it did seem pretty clear that Biden had actually won that state. Nevertheless, there were enough people on the Republican side who felt that they needed to present evidence that would indicate otherwise, and they requested a hearing for their state. So you were going into January 6th, there were 7 states that were requesting hearings and were contesting the Biden delegation. Now, the way that happens under the Constitution is that you need at least one elected federal representative, congressman, and one senator to jointly sign a letter. And they don't have to necessarily be from that state. Like, for example, the Ohio contestation in 2004 was done by Senator Barbara Boxer of California and Representative Catherine McKinnon of Georgia, I believe. And I think that also my own rep here in Massachusetts, Jim McGovern, was involved in an effort like this as well. So it doesn't have to be from the state. And you had commitments from, I think it was up to like 15 or 16 representatives led by Representative, what was his name, Mo Forbes from Alabama, who were committed to sign this bill. And you had several US senators who had committed to it as well. I think including Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, and I believe the guy from Wisconsin, and maybe one or two others. They had all committed to signing all 7 of these delegate contestations. Now, the way that was supposed to work is that the president of the assembly, once assembled, and that would have been Vice President Mike Pence, he would have read off in alphabetical order each of the states, and each of the states would present their delegations. And if there was a contested delegation, then the letter would be presented to the president of the assembly, and he would then call for up to a 2-hour hearing where the alternatives would present their evidence. The sitting delegation or the appointed delegation would contest them. There would be a back and forth. There would be a debate. There would be hearings. There would be witnesses, and all of the evidence would have been presented, and they would have had up to 2 hours. Now, if you have 7 states that are doing this, then that's what, 14 hours. That would have probably gone over 3 days of hearings if it had gone forward in an organized way, all right? And at the end of the up to 2-hour hearing, the president of the assembly, Mike Pence, would then have the option of doing 3 things. He would either reject the alternative delegation, and in this case, he would have seated the Biden delegation. He would have accepted the alternative delegation, in which case he would have seated the Trump delegation, or he would have not recognized either delegation, in which case that state would not get seated as in a delegation at all. And that the president of the assembly, according to the Constitution and according to legal theories by many people who are a lot smarter than me, I think Jonathan Turley weighed in on this, very good constitutional lawyer. The vice president probably would have likely not recognized delegates if enough evidence had been presented, in which case neither candidate would have had enough delegates to become president of the United States. And in that case, the contest goes back to the US House of Representatives for a vote. Now, the way that works is it's not the House of Representatives headed by Nancy Pelosi. It's not the conventional House of Representatives. It is a special session of the House of Representatives where each state sends 1 delegate. And that delegate is selected not by the governor, not by the state courts, but by the state legislators, because the state legislators, Article 2 of the US Constitution, hold the sole plenary power to regulate elections because they represent the people of that state. And if that happened, then you have, I think, 32, if not 33, state houses, state legislatures that had were under Republican control, in which case there would have been a 32 vote, probably, I would assume, although I shouldn't assume it, but I would say most likely, because it is a party vote, would have voted for Donald Trump, and Donald Trump would have become president of the United States. He would be serving a 2nd term right now. Now, this has happened before. It happened with John Quincy Adams in 1824, and it happened with Rutherford B. Hayes in 1879. So, in 1880. No, 1876, thank you. So, this is not an unprecedented situation, and that's how it was supposed to work. The American people expected to hear this evidence. Whether or not the election was won fair and square is something we still don't know, in my opinion. I'm not saying it was. I'm not saying it wasn't. I am simply noting that we have never really heard the evidence that was claimed in a sufficient legal forum. The first line of defense in America, the independent media, the fifth, what we used to call the fifth estate, which is supposed to be objective, which is supposed to investigate, they failed to investigate. So we didn't get anyone looking into the thousands of affidavits that were signed, the thousands of documents and pictures and witnesses and all the rest who claimed that they had witnessed voter impropriety, because the media was lacking curiosity. You didn't have the mainstream media look into it. You had some small conservative media look into it, but you didn't have the big media houses like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and the Boston Globe. They did not look into it. Not only did they not look into it, but they mocked and ridiculed anyone who did. So you did not have, it had openly partisan, hostile press that did nothing to try to see if any of these claims were true. So we didn't get, it shows, I mean, it's a whole different subject. I'll get into it in a different day. But you did not get in this country, we do not have in this country, a truly independent media anymore. I would argue, at least in the mainstream. They are partisan, they're openly so. We had, in fact, Lester Holt at that time actually said that partisanship is passé when he was receiving an award in an award ceremony. I think his position on that is probably typical of most of our journalistic establishment now. They don't, they have, they just don't, they're not going to do the work. I mean, we know during the campaign that they covered up important information about the Biden campaign, the Hunter Biden laptop. They claimed that it was a Russian hoax. They didn't look into it. They didn't report on it because they were partisans. So the American people did not get a proper hearing on that subject. The second leg in the stool was the judiciary. Almost every case was dismissed that was brought by voters, by regular citizens, by people who were working in the counting rooms, people who were at the polls, who witnessed things, people who showed up to vote in places like Pittsburgh and in Phoenix and were told, oh, you can't vote, you've already voted. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. All of a sudden, they were given a provisional ballot, which would be counted by who knows who. And, they were deprived their vote. In those cases, none of them were heard. They were dismissed not because of evidence, not because they made their way actually before a judge in a courtroom where there finally could be testimony and there could be a jury perhaps, or there could be, the media showing up, or there could be a lawyer, a prosecutor, and a defendant. No, they didn't get any of that because it never made it that far. The cases were all dismissed on technicalities. And there were certain examples where judges actually flat out said, we're not going to hear these cases because it's political and we don't want to get involved in politics, which is an outrageous thing for a judge to say. They're supposed to get into politics. They're supposed to be an independent, separate branch of government that monitors political activity. That is, it's so wrong and so, partisan, and it makes them a part of the problem. So the second leg in the stool failed, the judiciary. So you had a failure on the media and you had a failure in the judiciary. So we finally reached January 6th, and at last is the last hope, which is that Congress will hear this evidence and we will finally find out and make up our own minds as sovereign American citizens, whether or not this was real. And I'm not saying it was or wasn't. I simply am saying that on that day, I was looking forward with nervousness because I wondered how this would happen. But I was expecting to hear this evidence finally. Now, the fact is that the evidence was beginning to roll out. when the Vice President Pence called Arizona, which is one of the first states, because they do it in alphabetical order, I was watching TV. I was broadcasting at the same time. So I was kind of talking to someone, and I had one eye on the TV, and I was talking. And sure enough, the alternative delegation began to roll out what I considered to be a substantial and stunning evidence of voter impropriety in that state. The media was watching. They have to watch. They were filming. They have to film. Everybody was watching. The whole country was waiting and watching for this. So I was pretty pumped up about it. And then I turned to my guests. I was talking about a few other things. And then I went back to take a look, and I saw the most disheartening and the most discouraging sight. I saw people dressed in MAGA clothes and Trump clothes with Trump flags jumping in front, pushing their way into the US Capitol building. And I knew that that was bad news. It turns out that this stopped the hearing. It stopped the Arizona evidence, because that guy with the fuzzy hat and the paint on his face made his way into the Capitol chamber, so they had to shut it down. I get that. And the whole thing was stopped, and the whole country was outraged. And then they reconvened later that night, like at 12 o'clock midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and they simply gavelled through all the delegates. There was no contesting. There was no 7 states getting a hearing, nothing. They simply declared that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had won. And it was done in the dead of night. There was no media. There was very little coverage. Now, again, I'm not contesting the fact that they won in that sense. They are the president and vice president. This did happen. What I would suggest is, who benefited from this invasion by the US Capitol? Who is behind? And what was this? Who was involved with a coup, right? Who was involved with an insurrection here? I feel like I don't want to say much more other than to note that when you investigate something like this, you have to take a look at who benefits. Cui bono, the Latin term. Who benefited were the Democrats, was Joe Biden, was Nancy Pelosi, was the media, was the judges that all shut down any hearings, was what President Trump, I think, accurately called the deep state, that had been involved in literal criminality and attempts to harry, if not remove him from office. We now see Special Prosecutor Durham issue. There's been already 1 indictment and 2, there's been 1 conviction and 2 indictments. And there's probably more coming with regard to the whole phony dossier and all of that. I'm not going to get into that right now, but the point is that it was those forces that were doing whatever they had to do to stop Trump that were victorious as a result of that Capitol incursion, not Trump. I mean, the idea that Donald Trump wanted people to stop that hearing is ridiculous. It's preposterous. It makes no sense at all. And yet that was the accusation that was made, and he was impeached for that, even after he left office. And people still are touting that. There's, not only is there no evidence of that, but it's ridiculous. Now, did Donald Trump want to have a rally that day? Yes, he did. That was to support this hearing, not to break into the Capitol. So what happened? We don't fully know. We know that the New York Times had admitted that the head of the one of the groups that was involved in this, the Oath Keepers, and some, I don't want to give a name because I don't even, the Proud Boys, he was working with the FBI. There's evidence coming out that other people may have as well. There was participation by people involved with Antifa. There's films of that, putting on, Trump garb, and this one guy, Sullivan, bragging about it to a CNN reporter and then going on television about it. He's been filmed as one of the ringleaders. Hey, onto the Capitol. I think that most people who did enter the Capitol building would just, they saw the doors open and they just walked in. There was very little damage and they were peaceful. They shouldn't have done it. They were trespassing and maybe they should be charged with a crime. But the idea that this was an insurrection, that they were trying to overthrow the government, it's ridiculous. Doesn't make any sense. And I think that if there's going to be a genuine, investigation of that incident, which stopped the hearings as I went over, we ought to take a look at who actually was involved. We ought to get all the footage released, which the Capitol Police refuse to release now even, and which Nancy Pelosi refuses to release. And we ought to take a look at a lot of factors that went into that, because that has been used not only to get Biden in office, frankly. And again, I'm not contesting the fact that he was elected. That's how our system works. He is the president. So in case you think you're going to accuse me of, denying that, I'm not. I recognize that. But if we're going to have an honest look at how that happened and who might have been involved in this thing, then maybe we'll get to some truth. But instead, it was used to impeach Trump even after he was out of office. It was used to try to discredit Trump. It was used to censor Trump. He was removed from Twitter, where he had a huge influence, and all of the other media. He was removed. Parler was shut down at the time. You had, many people losing their accounts and shadow banning, and there was a huge launch of censorship, all because of this false charge that they had tried to overthrow the government. And that's still going on. What's worse is that hundreds of people were detained and picked up, and they're still being picked up and put into prison without facing charges. They are being held in this prison in DC. There's one case where, according to his lawyer, this guy was beaten. There are other men who are not getting their medicines. They're not well. They're being abused. This is America. This is the kind of stuff that, how can we point a finger at communist China where the Amnesty International says that they have 50,000 a year average of political prisoners who are not politically correct? How can we point a finger at that when we're doing this in this country? It's really, a very ugly development, and it does not look right for this particular government to be engaged in it, because I think what it does is it calls into question their credibility. It's not me saying that. It's just these kinds of actions tend to do that. And I just want to finish it up with what I was getting at in the first place, which is that now there is a criminalization of anyone who even questioned the results of the election. And that could possibly be me. That could be a lot of people. I'm going to finish with this one article in the Gateway Pundit. This is an Obama judge, an Obama-appointed judge, has ordered attorney Sidney Powell and fellow attorneys to pay $175,000 in damages for daring to challenge Michigan's 2020 election result. Well, first of all, anyone has a right to question election results. Sidney Powell had a case against Michigan. It was not heard. It was covered, and now she's being sued. Is this America? I'm going to read this article briefly here. Obama judge, and again, this is in the Gateway Pundit by Jim Hoft, published December 3rd. Obama judge Linda Parker ignored Trump's case on the integrity of the 2020 election in Michigan, raised by attorney Sidney Powell. It's not clear if she ever looked at it. She did, obviously, whether she looked at it or not, it was ignored by her. She's a federal judge, okay? It's the then judge Linda V. Parker threw the case out last December. There were over 100 legal affidavits from Michigan citizens alleging fraud in the 2020 election in Michigan. The Gateway Pundit recorded numerous riveting testimonials after the election from Michigan election workers who witnessed what they perceived were fraudulent acts during the election last November. The judge's opinion was a disgrace, according to the Gateway Pundit, and it's possible she didn't even review the data from Powell supplied in the case. She couldn't have received Powell's support to come up with her judgment. Judge Parker then ordered attorneys Sidney Powell and Linwood to be punished for daring to bring the case to court that she threw out. Democrat tyrants will not allow dissent or challenges. And this is not the first situation like this. This is a growing trend. It is a criminalization of anyone who disagrees with this regime. You know, I mean, ironically, for years during the Trump administration, I heard people like, I don't want to name names, but liberal left-wing radio hosts talking about the illegitimate government and the, not my president and the illegitimate regime, and using words like resistance and resist, which is an old communist term. I don't recall any penalties. I mean, I didn't like that kind of language, but it never occurred to me that they should be censored. I recall, I will name a name here, Tom Hartman, very left-wing radio host, for years, or at least for many, many months, was doing programs about machine vote fraud. I'm not going to go into details, but he claimed that this happened. I don't know if it was in 2016, but he certainly was claiming it when Bush won re-election. And there was, hour after hour of radio talk about that from the left. I don't recall hoping that they were censored. If anything, I wanted to get on and debate them about it and find out about it. And they may have been right, by the way, I think there may have been evidence that there might have been some of that going on in Ohio. Maybe Bush didn't win a second term. I don't know. I'm not saying he did. I'm not here to weave a conspiracy theory. I'm just saying that I bring it up only to mention that they spent huge amounts of media time on their programs with these kinds of questions. And it would never have occurred to anyone to have them censored. But now it's not only being censored, but it's being criminalized. She's being sued for this. Is this America? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to end it there. Let me just say to everyone that, maybe after tonight, I won't be anywhere. I don't know. I'll be taken off the air. So that could happen. That could happen anytime. That's why I'm gathering up so many different live streams and platforms so I gather them like some people collect stamps and coins with a goal and with the hope of doing this program and having a reasonable and honest conversation, not weaving any conspiracy theories, which I have not done tonight. I'm simply reporting on what has happened, period. I haven't made any claims. Let me be clear. I'm simply reporting the news, and that might be enough to have me taken off. But either way, I hope I'm still here tomorrow. My goal here is to launch this program Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern time. And I will be taking calls, and I will be inviting guests, and I'm going to be starting it this next week and in the coming weeks intermittently as I start to warm up and get ready for the official launch, which will be on January 1st. So I want to thank you for listening, everyone. Please check out my books on Amazon Books. That is my sponsor, myself. My latest book is called Sociology for Conservatives. Thank you. It's about time sociology had a conservative school. Anyway, again, I want to thank you for joining me this evening. Charles Moscowitz here. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and other channels. God bless all of you, and God bless this great country. I am hopeful. I am optimistic. I'm not a pessimist, but we need to speak truth, and we need to speak truth to power.